On a gray November morning, Margaret Collins stood on Platform 7 at Union Station, watching the rain create small rivers along the concrete. At 58, she'd learned that life rarely unfolded as planned. But she'd also learned that kindness cost nothing, even when you had almost nothing left. Her purse held exactly $10.37. It was Thursday. Her paycheck from the hospital cafeteria wouldn't arrive until Monday. But Margaret had survived tighter weeks than this. She had pasta at home, some canned soup, and a nearly full jar of peanut butter. She would manage. She always did. The morning commuters rushed past her, umbrellas bobbing like a parade of mushrooms. Margaret clutched her worn coat tighter and checked her watch. 15 minutes until her train to visit her sister across town. Linda had been asking her to come for weeks now, and Margaret had finally found a free Thursday to make the trip. That's when she noticed him. A young man sat hunched on the wet platform, maybe 30 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair plastered to his face by the rain. His clothes were damp and wrinkled, his canvas backpack stained with mud. He sat with his knees drawn up, staring at nothing in particular, and something about the slump of his shoulders made Margaret's heart tighten. She recognized that posture. She'd worn it herself 20 years ago after her divorce, when she'd sat in a parking lot trying to figure out how to start over at 38 with 2 teenagers and a mountain of debt. Margaret approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Excuse me," she said gently. "Are you all right?" The young man looked up and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. Eyes that had seen too much disappointment too soon. I'm trying to get to Philadelphia," he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of defeat. "I had enough for the ticket, but I got mugged last night. They took my wallet, my phone, everything. I've been sitting here since midnight trying to figure out what to do." Margaret glanced at the departure board. The Philadelphia train would cost $8.50. "What's in Philadelphia?" she asked, sitting down beside him, ignoring the dampness seeping through her coat. He hesitated, then spoke softly. "A job interview. It's with a small tech startup. I've been unemployed for 8 months, living in my car. This interview took 3 months to arrange. They specifically asked me to come in person." He laughed bitterly. "I probably look like I've been living in my car." "What's your name?" Margaret asked. "Daniel." "Daniel Foster." "Well, Daniel, I'm Margaret." She opened her purse and pulled out the $10 bill, her last one. She held it out to him. "This should get you there." Daniel stared at the money, then at her face. "Ma'am, I can't take your money." "Yes, you can," Margaret said firmly but kindly. "I can see it in your eyes. This interview matters. Sometimes we all need a little help to get where we're going. But what about you?" "What if you need—" "I have what I need," Margaret interrupted gently. It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. She had a roof over her head and food in her cupboard. She would be fine. "Take it. Go to your interview. And Daniel?" She waited until he met her eyes. "When you're back on your feet someday, help someone else. That's all I ask." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. His hand trembled as he took the bill. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do your best in that interview. That's enough." Margaret stood, brushing off her coat. Her train was arriving. She'd have to ask Linda for a loan for the return trip, which embarrassed her. But she'd manage. She always did. "Wait," Daniel called out. "How can I repay you? Can I have your address? Your phone number?" Margaret smiled. "No need, dear. Just pay it forward when you can." She boarded her train without looking back. 3 months passed. Winter settled over the city with its usual gray determination. Margaret continued her routine. Work at the hospital cafeteria, her small apartment, occasional visits with her grown children and grandchildren. She'd forgotten about the young man at the train station. Acts of kindness for Margaret were simply what you did when you could. They weren't investments expecting returns. It was a Tuesday afternoon, in late January, when the knock came at her apartment door. Margaret peered through the peephole and saw a well-dressed young man with neatly trimmed hair, holding a briefcase. She didn't recognize him at first. "Can I help you?" she called through the door. "Mrs. Collins? Margaret Collins?" "It's Daniel. Daniel Foster. From the train station." Margaret's eyes widened. She opened the door, chain still attached, studying him. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the defeated, rain-soaked young man. Before her stood someone confident, clean-shaven, wearing a tailored suit. "Daniel?" she said, astonished. "May I come in? I have something to tell you. Something important." Margaret unhooked the chain and opened the door. Daniel entered her modest apartment, looking around with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Please sit down," Margaret said, gesturing to her worn sofa. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Collins. I need to tell you something. The day you helped me, you gave me more than $10. You gave me hope when I had none left." Margaret sat across from him in her faded armchair. "Did you get the job?" Daniel smiled. "I got the job. But there's more to the story, much more, and you deserve to know all of it." He set his briefcase on the coffee table and took a deep breath. "Mrs. Collins, my full name is Daniel Foster Whitmore. My grandfather founded Whitmore Industries 40 years ago. I grew up with enormous wealth. Private schools, trust funds, everything money could buy." Margaret listened, her face showing gentle surprise. "When I turned 25, I inherited $43 million, Daniel continued. "I thought I had the world figured out. I spent money carelessly, surrounded myself with people who only liked my wallet. I was arrogant and foolish." He paused, his voice becoming softer. "Then I lost it all. Bad investments, so-called friends who embezzled from me, my own terrible decisions. By 29, I was broke. Completely broke. Everyone disappeared. The friends, the girlfriend, even some family members. I ended up living in my car, trying to rebuild from nothing. That's when I met you," he said, looking directly at Margaret. "The interview in Philadelphia was real. It was for a small software company. But here's what I didn't tell you because I didn't know it myself yet. That company was started by my old college roommate, the one person from my past who still believed in me. He gave me a chance." Daniel opened his briefcase and pulled out some documents. "In 3 months, with my business connections and his technical skills, we've turned that startup into something extraordinary. We just sold it last week. My share is $18 million. Margaret's hand went to her mouth. "Mrs. Collins, I spent the last 3 weeks trying to find you. I only had your first name in the train station. I hired a private investigator who checked hospital employee records from that area. It took time, but I found you." He handed her an envelope. "I'm not here to repay you for $10. That would be insulting. I'm here because you taught me something that all my wealth never taught me. That true richness isn't about money. It's about character. It's about being the kind of person who gives their last $10 to a stranger because it's the right thing to do." Margaret opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a check made out to her for $200,000. "Daniel, I can't—" "You can and you will," he said firmly but kindly, echoing her words from that rainy morning. "This isn't charity. This is gratitude. You saw a human being when everyone else saw someone to avoid. You gave when you had nothing to give. That kind of kindness saved my life." Tears rolled down Margaret's cheeks. "There's something else," Daniel said gently. "I'd like to set up a foundation in your name, the Margaret Collins Kindness Foundation. It will help people in crisis, people at train stations, bus stops, shelters, people who just need someone to see their humanity. I'd like you to help run it, if you're willing." Margaret couldn't speak. She simply nodded, the tears flowing freely now. Daniel stood and moved to sit beside her on the sofa. "You know what I remember most from that morning? Not just that you gave me money. You sat down next to me on that wet platform. You asked my name. You treated me like a person worth knowing. That's what changed everything." They sat together for a long moment, two people whose lives had intersected for 5 minutes and changed everything. "Why did you help me that day?" Daniel finally asked. "You didn't know me. You had almost nothing yourself." Margaret smiled through her tears, thinking back over her 58 years, the struggles, the disappointments, but also the moments of grace and unexpected kindness from strangers. "Because someone did the same for me once, a long time ago," she said. "When I was at my lowest point, a stranger showed me kindness. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in the world, that people could be good. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd pass it on." She looked at the check in her hands, then at Daniel's face. "And you know what? That $10 was worth more than this check. Not because of what came back to me. I never expected anything back. But because in that moment, I was able to be the person I wanted to be. That's the real gift of kindness. It reminds us who we are. Daniel smiled, understanding her completely. As winter turned to spring, the Margaret Collins Kindness Foundation opened its doors. Margaret retired from the hospital cafeteria, not because she had to, but because she'd found her true calling. The foundation helped hundreds of people at crossroads, people who needed to know that someone cared, people who needed to remember their own worth. Margaret kept the original $10 bill framed in her office. Daniel had retrieved it from the ticket he'd purchased that November morning and had it preserved. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "The most valuable currency is kindness. It costs nothing, but its returns are immeasurable." And on quiet mornings, when Margaret sat in her office looking at that framed bill, she thought about how life works in mysterious ways, how one act of kindness on a rainy platform had changed 2 lives completely. She thought about how we never truly know the ripple effects of our compassion. And she smiled, because in the end, the story wasn't really about money at all. It was about seeing each other, about being human together, about remembering that we all struggle, we all hope, and we all deserve kindness, especially when we least expect it. That was the gift Margaret had given Daniel, and in accepting her help, he had given her an even greater gift. The knowledge that kindness truly does return to us. Often